election.
Yeah.
Dame Jackie Doyle-Price.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And it's a pleasure to follow the Honourable Lady, the Member for Halifax. She was doing so well until she mentioned Thurrock. Perhaps I could just give some clarity as to why Thurrock got in such bad financial trouble. For the last decade, as some of you will know, Thurrock was the subject of very aggressive three-way politics, with UKIP holding the balance of power. And between a Labour minority administration and the move to a Conservative minority administration, it was frankly impossible to get a balanced budget passed because sensible decisions would not be taken either in terms of increasing council tax or reducing spending, which led council officers to pursue a very reckless, risky borrowing strategy to plug the gap. And I think that's really the lesson we should learn, is not so much about the overall strategy of this government towards local government, but about the need for all of us, wherever we are in public life, to take sensible decisions based on positive outcomes for those we serve. I would say, however, I listened very carefully to what she was saying about the whole issue of special educational needs, and I think she's absolutely right. This is an issue where we really need to get to grips with this, and it's great in a budget, isn't it? There's plenty of knockabout between the front benches, but her speech reminds us that we actually really need to think in a more granular way about whether we are really delivering the outcomes we want as a mature, advanced society, and particularly whether we are delivering the best outcomes for those who are most vulnerable and for those who are perhaps least able to speak for themselves. And I think we are witnessing some very real challenges for children with statements in our schools for a whole host of reasons. One of them is that for a while there was a very fashionable view amongst the educational establishment that children with special needs ought to be educated in a mainstream setting, and that will work for many of them. But for others, we will actually be failing them and failing the other children in that school if we continue with that model. But overall, it's led to an underinvestment in special provision, with the result that so many schools are having to manage more and more children with special needs. And I've seen it at first hand within my own constituency. We are having reports of a massive increase post the pandemic in children with statements, not all of which are related to having been out of school, by the way. You know, some of these things are genetic too. There's been a massive increase in children presenting as non-verbal, and I don't think we've really got to grips to understand why that might be. But right now, what we do need to acknowledge is that that explosion in special needs is being absorbed by our existing school sector. And let's pay tribute to them, they're doing their best. I've seen at first hand the real efforts being made in some of my schools to manage this issue and to give the best possible education they can to all their pupils. And you know, I'm told that, you know, I visited Tudor Court in my constituency very recently, and they told me that it's now 13% of their intake that has a statement, and that is actually low by comparison, which strikes me as being quite a significant indication that this is an issue that ought to become much more top priority. And again, I come back to this issue about how we must make sure that, you know, first and foremost, we look after those that need our help the most, not those who shout loudest. I often say that this place often works best for the pointy elbow middle classes. We really do need to make sure that we are focusing on those who need our help the most, and indeed I will.
Grateful for her giving away, and I think she makes an excellent point about special needs provision actually across the country in most authorities, regardless actually of the politics in some places, really damaging for young people. And Bristol's just become part of this safety valve initiative from the government, along with neighbouring Conservative and other run councils. So would she agree with me that we do need a serious look at this across the country now to understand both demand and the provision that already exists, and work together on that for the benefit of children who are coming through the system and their families who are so desperate for that support?
Yeah, I do agree with that. I think we have an outbreak of consensus which we should embrace, I think. And she's absolutely right, because we can't actually tackle this in a silo. because ultimately it's for the local authority to ensure that statements are, the statement of educational need is given. But equally, while we've got a situation where local authorities are under pressure with budgets, I know a few years ago I went to my LEA and talked about the need to progress a free school application for special provision, and the message I got clearly back was, well, we don't want to encourage that because people will move here and we've got to look after them till we're 25. So I think this is something that we really do need a much more high-level look at and make sure that we're looking at delivering the provision that's needed across the board. Turning now to the substance of the budget, I have to say I really welcome the decision on national insurance. And clearly national insurance is no longer the contributory levy that it once was, because the idea was it bought credits which bought you your pension and entitled to out-of-work benefits. And really they've become much more universal. So as a separate tax, it really makes no sense. But it does actually give way to the fact whether we should have a philosophical debate about whether there ought to be a contributory principle for some services. And I think particularly in respect of we are still awaiting a long-term solution to how we fund social care, for example. While I welcome the aspiration to remove national insurance, I do think we still need to get back to really sorting out that particular issue, because again, while ever there's uncertainty in how we fund social care, again, it's local authorities that are picking up the pressure on that, and ultimately, it's been very convenient to put that responsibility onto local authorities. But I think we also need to do our bit now. If we are going to expect, everything has to be paid for at the end of the day. If we're going to have mature and sensible long-term decisions at central government level, we need to actually give local authorities the same space. And while ever there's uncertainty about how the cost of social care is going to be met, they actually can't make those sensible decisions. And some of the disasters that the Honourable Lady from Member for Halifax described are only going to become more and more at risk because the certainty just simply isn't there. And I'd also suggest actually we really do need to really relook at how we ensure that local authorities do make mature and sensible decisions about their budgeting. I mean, we've seen, the Audit Commission has gone and been replaced by audit firms that go in, but the frank advice that ought to be given just simply hasn't been. We used to have surcharge, which was a very blunt instrument to ensure that councillors made mature and sensible financial decisions. As I say, it was very blunt, but nevertheless, there's no stake for councillors, and quite often, we often see in this place we've got great champions of local communities, but we also have to show leadership and maturity in making sensible decisions. When you get to local councils, that's on speed. You have great local ward champions who literally just view themselves as being the spokesman for street by street, everything that's the problem, but perhaps don't properly recognise their corporate responsibilities for making sensible judgments about, a multi-million-pound business that's there to deliver outcomes for the whole of the local authority area, not just for them. So I actually think as well as looking holistically about some of these things from an outcome, we do need to actually properly make sure that where local authorities are getting things wrong, there's an element of accountability that's outside the ballot box. And especially because the level of turnout in our local elections is so poor. Now, part of that's all our fault, by the way. We're all political parties. It's our job to motivate people to vote for us. And perhaps, I often get very frustrated by the knockabout of political debate, and I think it's a big turn-off. It's a big turn-off for me sometimes when I sit here on a Wednesday lunchtime. So for people who aren't engaged in politics, it's an even bigger one. So the result is that when it comes to local politics particularly, they zone out, they switch off. So even after the biggest failure in local government finance in a local authority, the turnout in my local elections in Thurrock was less than 20% in some wards. Now, isn't that shocking? And what that tells you is that the public out there just think, well, it doesn't make any difference. Doesn't matter who I vote for, nothing will change. By the way, we should all think about that as the general election comes along, because I detect that mood out there as well. Indeed.
The Honourable Lady for giving way. I might say she's never a turn off for me, and I think I think the Honourable Lady's made some excellent points, and not least in respect of SEND children and kinship carers. I think those individuals and those groups their needs should be addressed. But on the point about local government finance, my local authority it's a kind of a coalition of Conservatives, Independents and Lib Dems, and heaven knows I criticise them an awful lot, I think quite justifiably. But I think we should recognise that all local authorities, mine and Thurrock, have had to deal with huge cuts over the last 10 or 14 years. My local authority, £130 million, and they've had to cut £260 million from their revenue spend. I was just looking at some figures, and is it not more sensible to change council
we do have quite a lot of time this afternoon, but that was an incredibly long intervention. I'm looking forward to the Honourable Gentleman's own speech in due course. Jackie Doyle-Price.
As I acknowledge, there have been cuts to local authority budgets, but I also think at the root of this is that so much of local authority funding comes from the centre. So, actually, as a local elector, where is the accountability there? You know, as far as they're concerned, the council can only spend what's given to them. And I come back again, is on the basis of those cuts, it's incumbent on councils to make sensible decisions, and they can't have the cake and eat it. They have to live within their means. And what I sense is that, and I suspect, given the Rainbow Coalition he's just described, there's an awful lot of playing to the gallery. And I'm afraid what we expect of our councillors is for them to be more mature than that.
Well, Mark, one thing about.
Yes.
Does she agree with me that one of the problems is that we gave local authorities a power of general competence, and what we should have done is concentrate their minds on the things that they really have to do?
Yeah, I do. I mean, with hindsight, that was a big mistake. I think it was done with the best of intentions. You know, given that local authorities were in this new challenge set of circumstances, there was a desire to give them the freedom to do more and be more relevant without constraints. But what it's actually done is let license for risky behaviour, and I think we will still see some more consequences of that in due course. Clearly, we would all like to be in a much better place with regard to the strength of our economy and the rate it's growing and the state of our public finances. But I do think we need to reflect that, you know, the last 15 years have been challenging. We've had 3 significant shocks which have cumulatively made us poorer than we would like to be. That's just a fact. You know, the 2008 financial crisis, clearly that had to be managed. We of course have had the consequences of the pandemic and the fact that we locked down our economy for 2 years, the best part of, one way or another, which clearly has a massive impact on growth. And the billions we spent keeping people in their jobs still has to be paid for. And clearly also Ukraine, and not only our need to support the people of Ukraine, but also the consequence on energy prices. And I think we, again, coming back to this need for responsible leadership, we should level with the public about what these things mean. You know, they're not stupid, they're not deceived by spin and rhetoric. They know that these things have a consequence. And if we don't treat them with the respect that they deserve and level with them, they will show us the lack of respect that we show them. You know, they do understand that this all needs to be paid for. And if we don't actually face up to those things, we end up compounding the challenges made by those political choices. And I'll start again with the financial crisis. Clearly, there was a need for a massive intervention to stop the whole banking system from collapsing. But we got addicted to QE. And the correction that should have taken place following that financial crisis never happened because guess what? We don't want middle-class people who vote to have a reduction in their property values. So by sticking with that policy, we ended up with rates of interest that were artificially low for a very long time. That completely distorted asset class prices. It made everyone put all their investments into property, and that's contributed to massive intergenerational unfairness because people can't now afford to buy a house. Doesn't that just show, short-termism, the failure to be real and get real and explain to the public and make long-term financial decisions that will make the most of growth in this country? Because let's just think about it. We're all bemoaning the lack of growth in our economy, but if we've generated a system whereby there is more profits to be made by investing in housing than investing in business and wealth creation that way, this is where we end up. And this is where we all need to actually make a real determined effort to be more long-term in our decision-making and not just pursue the retail benefits of going up a few percentage points in the opinion polls. Lockdown. Again, we spent billions to keep people in their jobs, but that has to be repaid by the taxpayer. And people do understand this. They know that nothing can be made for free. But we also need to address the wider consequences of what we've done with lockdown, because there is a longer-term impact on our nation's productivity. We were all psychologically damaged by being taken out of social circulation for 2 years. We've ended up with work practices that aren't always the most efficient. But worst of all, we've looked and we've entered an expectation that the state will deal with every problem. And again, we need to actually get back to that leadership, which actually says we've all got to collectively fix this problem. Because fighting COVID is the equivalent of fighting a war. And what we did after the Second World War is everyone knew that there was going to be a massive effort to get our country back together again. We've pretended it was all easier than it is. And never more so than when we talk about public services. I hear over and over again about underfunding. Underfunding, what does that mean? If there isn't enough money to deliver what people are expecting, we have to be honest about that. And we have to actually cut our cloth. We have to recognise that nothing can be delivered without being paid for. So either we increase taxes or we look at what we're actually delivering. Ultimately, we all want to get into a position where we are much richer and we can pay for a lot more. But we have to acknowledge that we have to make some concessions to actually get to that place where we want to be when we've dealt with a shock that we've had so far. I also think we need to have a much more honest debate about what we should be spending our money on. I think Ukraine illustrates that the need to spend more money on defence has really become more obvious. I'll be honest, I think we've taken our eye off the ball since 1989, but now we perhaps face a more challenging and unstable world than we have done for some time. And actually the best investment we can make to keeping our energy prices low and stable is to carry on investing in defence at a better rate than we are doing. I just want to say two final things about the issues which are perhaps the biggest challenge, and again, not the focus of a mature debate or leadership in this place. The first is immigration. There is no doubt the public think that we've got too much immigration, and certainly we've become dependent on immigration as a source of cheap labour. So we had a period, particularly from 2006, where we were open to Eastern European labour. The numbers with which that immigration took place within the UK did actually have a very positive effect on growth, but it was growth as in the overall quantum. The impact, however, on individual productivity and on earnings and on GDP per capita was poor because it had that depressing level of earnings. And I think overall the resentment towards immigration comes from a lot of those people who found their earnings diminished as a consequence. We think about the Avida Same Pet generation of builders and labourers who earn lots of money going overseas found that, post 2006, their earnings were depleted because people here were choosing to employ Lithuanians and Poles, and because that was cheaper labour. Naturally, they will have a very clear view that immigration has reduced their earnings, and I think that was a big part of why. Yes, indeed.
I think she's completely inaccurate. That very often the reason why employers in the United Kingdom have been employing workers from the European Union is because there hasn't been the labour available within the UK. That, for example, is why we now have a crisis in recruitment to social care professions, because we've stopped Europeans coming in and there's nobody in the UK that's able to do the work.
The Honourable Gentleman referred to the issues regarding social care. He has a fair point, but I don't think that's true of HGV drivers or builders, labourers, or anyone in the construction industry at all. It is true that we have relied on cheap migrant labour to deliver social care, but I think that's largely because we haven't valued social care as a profession, and it's also, to be frank, it's allowed us to kick the can down the road as to how we pay for social care and how we pay for and how we live our lives in later life. Because while ever we've got that abundance of cheap labour to come and work in that sector, we've been kicking the can down the road as to how we fund our later stage of life for some time. So again, it's not just the impact on earnings. It's allowed policymakers to be very lazy in terms of grappling with these difficult issues. Yes, indeed.
So I'm very grateful. Before she sits down, I wanted to just jump in and say how important I think the speech she's making is. She's speaking with the authentic voice of common sense conservatism, which we need to hear so much more of. And a particular point there about the depressive effect on wages of the high rates of immigration that we've had over this century so far is incredibly important and relevant to the debate we're having today about the workforce. Does she agree that at least our party does have a plan to reduce legal migration substantially in the years ahead, which is more than we hear from many parties across the chamber?
I do agree we have a plan, but what I would say to my honourable friend, and I'm sure he would agree with me, is it's got to be more than words. It's got to be delivered on. And he will have heard, as probably many of us have, is that how many industries have lobbied us to make sure that this particular profession is added to the skilled workforce list, because actually those employers don't want to pay those higher wages, and we as politicians need to be robust about that and actually say, you know what, we genuinely want to deliver a high wage, high skilled economy, and I'm afraid if you want to employ HGV drivers, you're going to have to pay them the money that they deserve, and that's how we will reward aspiration and hard work by the people of this country, and we will have overall better growth. But it's not going to be painless getting there, because some employers will have to start paying higher wages, and that will filter through to higher prices. But that's how we correct our economy and become the great world leader that we should be, and we should be the powerhouse of the G7. Given the skills and abilities within our country, we should be leading the world, and we've allowed ourselves to become impoverished by quick fixes, being brutally frank. The final issue, I think, I just want to, in relation to the House, I've said for a long time, the biggest challenge facing this country is the lack of affordable housing and the failure to build enough new homes. And I welcome the continued emphasis by this government on this, but we're still failing to deliver. And the Chancellor mentioned yesterday that new investment to facilitate new housing in Barking and Canary Wharf. Well, to learn from what can go wrong, I would just encourage him to travel a few miles east to my constituency, to Purfleet. Now, Purfleet sits on the River Thames. There is a railway station that can take you to Fenchurch Street in the City of London in 45 minutes. Now, we have been talking about building 3,500 homes in Purfleet since 2008. Now, just put that on the River Thames, 45 minutes from central London. These homes should sell themselves, shouldn't they? Now, let me tell you, PCRL, a public-private partnership, was developed to deliver these 3,500 homes. It had £70 million worth of public land gifted to it. It was given a grant of £5 million in 2015 to kickstart the works. It subsequently received £70 million in HIF funding. And I tell you, we were promised the first house should have been constructed in 2018. We're now at 2024, we have not got a single house, not a single new home after all that public money. And I'd just like to register with the government. Making capital funding available, it's great. Seeing these wonderful brochures which set out these nice plans for new homes, all great, but nothing is being delivered. And I just wonder whether there's something wrong with how we're approaching these things, because from where I'm sitting, we've got consultants who've managed to earn a pretty penny over the last 8 years out of Purfleet, but we've achieved nothing. Nothing except for the disappointments of the public who've supported and got behind these proposals and have found their hopes and ambitions dashed. You know, we deserve better. They deserve better. They've been seriously misled by a number of people. You know, it's not for me to apologise to people of Purfleet. I did my best to call out the Emperor had no clothes for a very long time. But the public out there gets very disillusioned when given promises by politicians that come to nothing. And our final point, therefore, would be, please, government, if we are really going to deliver more new homes, we really do need to look at why we haven't realised the ambitions from these sorts of projects in the past.
Rushanara Ali.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.